Okay, I'd like to call to order the September 27th meeting of the Elderly Nutrition Program Task Force. And I want to thank everybody for coming out. We're going to start with remarks from the chairs. It's good to see everyone. I do want to just say that Representative Gilchrist and I have been trying to do a deep dive into the finances of the program to really understand how the funding works. And so that's why yesterday we did send letters to the AAAs just requesting contract details to understand the relationship with the providers. So I think that's probably going to be an area that we're going to be looking into going forward in a little bit of detail. But before we begin, I do want to turn it over to my co-chair, Representative Gilchrist.
Great. Thank you, Senator Lesser. Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to say last we met, we discussed having subcommittees, but as you heard when Chandra sent out the email, everyone appeared to want to serve on the subcommittees. So we thought it made more sense to continue this process in our larger group. I am recovering from COVID, so I will likely turn off my camera, but I am happy to be here today. It's the best I'm feeling so far. So good to see everyone.
Nothing like elderly nutrition to get you feeling better. Feel better, Representative.
Thank you.
Okay. Our ranking members on? I don't see them. Okay, so we're going to skip them. And the next item of business, has everyone received the draft minutes for the August 30th meeting? Okay, great. Can I have a motion to adopt the minutes? Motion by Joel Sikorsky. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Aaron. Is there any discussion? Well, I'll just say I was surprised to see the minutes reflect my distaste for raw broccoli, but it is accurate, so I can't object. So without any other discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, all opposed, nay. Then the minutes are adopted. Okay, so then let's go right into the meat of it. The first item for discussion for today is just about elderly nutrition program design. Well, one thing that I think we did receive an offer, a very generous offer from the Department of Aging and Disability Services to give us an overview of the program. I don't think they are ready to present that today, unless you tell me otherwise. But I think we were hoping for a subsequent meeting for that. Jen, is that accurate? I think it's accurate. But given that, I think it might be helpful just in terms of
Hi, sorry. I'm not sure why my camera's not working. I am currently in two meetings at the same time, but I think I'll defer to Erin if she's ready with the presentation. I'm not sure.
We can reschedule it to the
Can
next.
anyone hear me?
Erin?
We can hear you, Jen. I'm happy for us to present at the next meeting.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't want to. Okay, great. We'll do that at the next meeting then, and give a big. I think we had some high level questions about the program, and I think that could help inform some of the specific conversations. So it was a very generous offer. I think we'd love to take you up at the next meeting, if that makes sense. But in terms of, but I think it is helpful to understand the Older Americans Act and specifically how the structure with the AAAs and how it potentially intersects with other programs that provide elderly nutrition. And I'm thinking of the home and community-based meals program. But would this be an opportunity for us to hear directly from some of the providers about, questions or concerns about the program design? I think it might. Anybody want to? I mean, I've heard sort of through the grapevine questions about funding timelines and deficits, and I guess it would be, from my 20,000-foot view, I'm surprised that there could be a deficit in a program that's dependent on, fund. What the funding is in advance, so it's not really, it should not be a surprise. And yet, it's, I'm hearing from providers that there are deficits at times, and so understanding why that is and understanding how the contractual elements work, I think, could be helpful to.
Can I ask a question first?
Absolutely.
What are the qualification issue or criteria for someone to actually be in the program?
That's a good question. Can anyone answer that?
I'm happy to jump in. For specifically the Older Americans Act program, which is what we are usually talking about when we're talking about elderly nutrition, an individual has to be age 60 or over. They can be the spouse of an eligible recipient who lives in the home, or they can be a disabled individual, an individual with a disability living in a facility where congregate meals are served. And that is from the Older Americans Act. In terms of Connecticut Home Care Program, that is a different beast, and I can't speak to that.
And Aaron, I assume when we supplement the Older Americans Act funding with state funding, we're providing that with the same eligibility criteria?
Correct, because it's a match.
Okay.
You said spouse, does that also include a sole caregiver?
No, it's a spouse, is how it's written in the Older Americans Act.
Erin, are you saying that a spouse that's younger than 60 years old would be eligible for a congregate meal?
Yes. I'm sorry, if they are there with their spouse who qualifies.
Thank you. So there's no income qualification or anything like that. Okay, thank you.
No, and just to add to that, for the home delivered meals, you have to be 60 and over and homebound.
I'm sorry, what does homebound mean?
Homebound means like you can't go out and basically do your own shopping. You can't go out. You can't really cook for yourself. So you're basically tied into your home, and you have no access to food. Sort of. It's not so restrictive, but pretty much you have to be homebound. Yeah.
Is there someone who makes that determination?
It's an assessment that's made. Yes.
Okay, okay.
There's also nutritionally at risk. You can be able to leave your house and drive. Say a spouse passes away and someone's at home and they've never cooked. They don't know how to cook. They don't know how to shop. Nutritionally at risk is something that we've used in the past to make sure that they're provided with meals.
In that assessment, is that typically done by the provider or by the area agency, or who does that?
It's a mixture of both. Some agencies do their own assessments and some area agencies do the assessments for them.
Yep.
And when that happens, is there any kind of social work connection or occupational therapy connection to see if that person can potentially do it?
When the assessment happens in the community action agencies, we provide wraparound services. So if we see that there's an additional need for that particular customer, we will provide wraparound services based on the assessment that the community action agencies does.
Okay, so that's good. So potentially they could develop.
They're tied into different services, yes.
Great.
And that also carries through for work with the agencies on aging. Obviously, if we're doing the assessment as well, we involve caregiver support programs, looking at needs for transportation or other referrals that would help the individual. And wanted to note that we sometimes use the term taxing effort. So, as Joel said, there are times when somebody may be on 24/7 oxygen, but if they were able to, go out with their portable, it doesn't mean that they're able, maybe they are at the grocery store on occasion with somebody because that's where they like to go, but it's a taxing effort for that, would be a taxing effort for them to make the meal for homebound. So homebound does not mean bedbound. It means not able to leave the home on their own and prepare meals on their own.
And in terms of uptake between the congregate settings and the home delivered, do you have a approximate, breakdown of that? And how many individuals does it? I mean, I know that it goes up and down, but how many individuals does it approximately serve?
I'm happy to address, in the last federal fiscal year, which was federal fiscal year 22, 10,000, a little over 10,000 individuals received 1.8 million home delivered meals, and just over 9,000 eligible older adults received just under 300,000 congregate meals.
And do you have any sense of how we stack up against other states proportionally? Do we provide more or less state funding? Is this something that, obviously Connecticut is, maybe it's not obvious, but Connecticut is older than most states, but I don't know if that means that, we provide more, have a bigger or smaller nutrition program.
I don't know exactly how we stack up in terms of allocations from the feds. That comes down to populations, and that's how the feds decide what states get what allocations. So they do look at populations and demographics.
So the Older Americans Act funding goes to the state, and it's given to ADS for administration, and then ADS then passes it through to the area agencies on aging. How do you do that?
Correct. It comes from, and some of this is in the presentation that I can give, but basically it's by funding formula, which again looks at the demographics and the population of each region, each planning and service area of older adults, and then it's allocated according to formula based on those numbers.
So it's purely based on population.
There's an equitability piece where some is divided equally, and then the rest of it is by population, and that is to ensure that everybody has adequate minimum funding.
Is that solely up to your discretion, or is that in state law, or is that in the Older Americans Act? That specific?
Well, Older Americans Act requires that we have an interstate funding formula that looks at those factors.
Okay. And then what's your role once that funding is passed through to the area agencies? Do you have an ongoing supervisory role, or is it up to that? Like at that point,
We oversee the program. We do all of the menu approvals. We do site inspections. We do home delivered route inspections. We pay the AAAs. So that it's oversight and administration.
So obviously one of the questions that we're all wondering right now is what on earth are those folks down in Washington going to do? Is, are we going to shut down or not? I imagine as a result of the way the federal government works, we don't get funding consistently. You get it in fits and starts. How does that work in terms of the administration of the program? Because one of the consistent things that I hear from the providers is that they don't know when they're going to get paid.
It's an issue.
Yeah.
It's an issue. So at the beginning of every federal fiscal year, which is October, there's rarely, almost never, I will say, a budget in place. The federal government and legislature may have a continuing resolution that provides a small amount of money to states to keep business open. But if the federal government does not allocate the funds are not there. So it's definitely a problem between October and February. And that's happening in all states. And it is a result of how the federal government operates.
So, but right now we're in September, so we're not to October yet. So since it's long after February, I'm assuming that there should not be any providers waiting for funding unless I'm missing something, right? That they should have all been trued up by now.
I could, one of the things that we were hoping as providers is a way to have the state kind of front the money that we wait for the government to send. It's usually February or March when the SUA gets their money, like Aaron was saying, to distribute back down to us, which is impossible when you've started serving on October 1st of a year, which is coming up next week. We're into a new grant year. They don't even have the money to give to us in a lot of cases, except for the state match that's budgeted. So one of the things that we wanted to work on with this task force was a way to possibly use ARPA money or some type of state fund to allow the SUA to distribute funds to the AAAs in advance of that to get our contracts written, because you have a pretty good idea what the federal government's going to send every year because of the continuing resolution. It's just a matter of them getting it to us or not. So we were looking as programs and providers and our support network of AAAs and SUA of a way to get the money in place so that it gets distributed out so that we can pay our bills and continue to serve, kind of on the promise that the money's coming from the federal government in February. So we were looking for a way to fund that money in advance, and then the state essentially pays itself back when the federal money comes in. So that was one of the ideas that was floated between all the groups when we talked to each other in order to get funding in place so that no one's waiting anymore. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it makes sense if it's possible. I think that falls into the first category of discussion in terms of the program design, because we know that that is not something that's new, but this year has been really ridiculous. And when you say that there's providers waiting for dollars, I will tell you that right now I'm waiting for $1.7 million from North Central, and I'm waiting for another $156,000 from Senior Resources Area on Aging. So there actually is something going on here that we need to somehow streamline. So I'm asking Erin, in terms of the administrative oversight, what are the processes that you go through during the year in terms of helping the AAAs or with their processes when they get stuck?
So I have a certain amount that I can present right now that I'm happy to present to sort of give this overview, because it's becoming sort of piecemeal. And I just want to make sure that we all have the broad overview, and I'm happy to present what I have ready. I do also just, Representative Gilchrist has her hand raised, so I just want to make sure that I don't interrupt her.
Go ahead, Julie.
Thanks. I was just going to say, with that idea of fronting the money, maybe we could look to what happens in the LIHEAP program, because the same issue apparently is happening, and DSS does some kind of thing with the money to ensure that there's funding. Anyway, that's more for Senator Lesser and I, just want to put that in the notes. We could check with that department to see how they handle it.
And I actually apologize. We do have a new member of the panel from DSS, a new designee, and I should have introduced them earlier. Can the DSS representative introduce themselves?
Who's that?
Stan? Or Stan is new too. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm new, but I'm from the estuary. We're a provider also.
Oh, terrific. Sorry about that. And who's I'm sorry, I'm lost on my notes, but who is Alec is on from DSS.
No, I'm not from DSS.
My notes are not accurate. Sorry about that.
I apologize. Yes. I do represent DSS. Yes.
You are. Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Okay, good. I was really starting to question my sanity, but I'm glad to know.
I apologize.
Who are all of these folks? I don't know. Okay. Well, welcome. And we can work with DSS to sort of get a better sense per Jillian's question about how the how LIHEAP works in terms of fronting money to see if that's a potential option. Yes, Marie.
I just wanted to mention that also in the Connecticut Home Care Program for Elders, the Medicaid waivers, we also receive an advance at the start of a contract because the providers, very similarly to the elderly nutrition providers, the providers in the community who are going out to the home to provide in-home care, to provide home delivered meals, to provide adult day services, would go without funding. And so because of that, we had always started with an advance so that we could keep the funds moving and to pay our own payroll. So it does, I do think Joel's idea of starting with an advance would be extraordinarily helpful to the elderly nutrition program. And also, when we look at state funding, Lena, I think you asked a very pointed question that perhaps we can try and break down some of the state to AAA funding issues, which cause a tremendous burden on the ENPs, and we recognize that. We have requirements about when we can request funding from the State Unit on Aging. The State Unit on Aging's fiscal group has up to 45 days to respond to a request for payment from the AAA. So let's take the month of October as an example. If the ENP is serving meals all throughout the month of October, they are buying food supplies, gasoline to get put in the trucks, they're paying their staff for the 31 days of October. They do not enter the data that allows us to request payment, the MIS data, Managing Information Systems, which includes the clients that they served and the number of meals that each of those clients served. It may take them another 15 days after the end of the month to enter that data. We have to go through a process of confirming the eligibility of those folks and putting it into a very antiquated federal database system. And then we know what we're asking the State Unit on Aging for in terms of dollars. Again, then their fiscal group, assuming everything goes smoothly, has 45 days to respond to the AAA. So we are going to get payment for that meal in December. But the ENP has already paid their food supply people, their gasoline bills, their staffing back in October. So even under the best of circumstances, we see payment delays that do not meet a 30-day receivable. So in other words, we're asking the ENPs to behave like a business, purchase this stuff up front, and we're asking them then to wait 90 days for reimbursement for something that they're paying for on behalf of the state. So I think if we really want this task force to take a serious look at what the issues are, we have to start at that payment cadence and figure out a way to support it, because everyone has the same goal, Senator, and that's to get as many meals to the people who need them. We talked about eligibility. Michelina asked a question at the beginning about eligibility. Yes, age 60 and older, there is no means testing. The Older Americans Act does not allow means testing like the Department of Social Services does for Medicaid eligibility into the Connecticut Home Care Program for Elders. So therefore, we are going by what the senior tells us or does not tell us, because we cannot force them to tell us, and we have no mechanism for confirming it. So therefore, an elder with $300,000 in the bank and reasonable Social Security and maybe even a pension may be receiving the same home delivered meal as a neighboring city where the individual has less than $1,600 in the bank or less than $5,000 in the bank and a paltry Social Security only. As the Older Americans Act does not allow us to discriminate. It says target, but at the same time, it says you may not means test. So it's a little bit of a conflict. And as we see the population growth increase in the older cohort and the wonderful job Connecticut has done at making sure that people have an alternative to nursing home placement, leaves them in the community. If they're in the community, they occasionally need supports. That support may come in the form of home delivered meals. The demand increases. Same time, inflation in food, gasoline, and employment, labor has increased incredibly over the last 3 years. increasing the unit cost. If the unit costs increase, I have fewer meals to get out into the community. So it has that, you send your child to the store for 5 candy bars at $1 each. That's fine as long as they're $1 each. When the candy bars are $1.25, they're not coming home with 5 candy bars, right? Same thing happens with our elderly nutrition program. So these are kind of the true cause and effect issues that we need to get to in the task force if we really want to make a meaningful change in this program.
Thank you so much, Marie. And it seems that, if the 90-day delay were ever tolerable, it probably made sense before we had, rampant inflation. And that probably puts additional pressures because it's just hard to compare, March dollars with September dollars if the prices change in the interim. And so that could put some additional pressures on the program and, make it harder to true up the numbers. I do have a question though about the lack of means testing. I'm wondering if that means that you've got it sort of increases the role of local groups like local senior centers, and it means you might have big differences in uptake in different parts of the state because there might be, let's say, I'm just picking it out of thin air, but let's say there's a really good senior center in New Canaan. They may get a large number of seniors to participate in the program or in the programs, but you could see real, gaps across the state. Is that something that folks are seeing, where you see some towns where there's just a huge upsurge, even though there's some obvious population difference between the towns?
I would say definitely you're correct. There are those differences town to town. What we have tried to do, and in some cases very successfully working with the ENPs, is to take a town like in my region, we have Westport, for example. It's a town where the median income is quite a bit higher than the average state income. We require individuals to donate more, and we can't really require it because it's not a fee. But what we say to the town of Westport is, if your folks do not pay enough in donations, then the town has to pay for it. If you want the same level of meals and you want to invite everyone into the meal program, that's fine. But town of Westport, you're going to have to help subsidize the program. And that's how we counterbalance the difference between perhaps a Bridgeport, which is also in my region, where the median income is considerably lower than Westport.
So you can allocate meals between those towns based on the town's wealth, or ask the town for an assessment or to contribute. There's that.
There really isn't, and again, that's part of the problem. It's given to the PSA or the regional planning group, and we don't say at the beginning of the year, here's the number of meals available to Westport, here's the number of meals available to Stamford, here's the number of meals available to Bridgeport, because as you can imagine, you don't know how many people are going to show up at these cafes for lunch. It varies greatly, and I won't even talk about the differences since COVID, because that has created a whole, numbers that you thought you could count on an increase of 3 to 5% every year are no longer the case with COVID. You've got all kinds of changes happening. However, we say, here's how many meals we can deliver in this region, 1.8 million meals. And then we ask the ENPs to do their best to distribute them based on need. Again, with home delivered, you would go into a waiting list. We try and track, if we continue to sell 5 meals a week to 10,000 people, we can make it through to September 30th. If we do 11,000, we either have to decrease the number of meals we sell every week, or put people on a waiting list and wait until someone either expires or transitions off that list and bring on a new person. With the community cafes, it's a little bit more difficult because the senior center is opening up its lunchroom, and it's very hard to put a guard at the door and say, okay, only 20 people today, and you 10 came in a little bit later, sorry, you can't have the meal. So what we have done is we're watching the utilization rates every single month and doing our very level best to not overspend or over allocate so that the ENPs aren't left with a deficit. But it's also important to note that you don't want to underspend either or under allocate meals, because these are volume-based contracts. So their fixed expenses are not covered if we do not provide the number of meals that are needed. I don't want to monopolize, and I'm sure other people can say the same thing, but it is a tricky financial process. Not that we can't come up with some solutions. I think there are some solutions that are well within our realm.
And when somebody, and I'm sorry, this is super interesting, and I'm learning a lot. I'm sure other folks already know all of this, but I don't. So if somebody signs up and they're on a waiting list, is that a first come, first serve, or is there some sort of need assessment to figure out how to prioritize that?
For home delivered meals, there is a need assessment. It's done as part of the intake form that we call the Form 5. And there is a number of questions regarding someone's level of nutritional quality and access to food. Depending on the number scored in that nutritional assessment, those individuals with 5 or more nutritional needs will rise to the top of the wait list, and others will come in as they come in. So first come, first served.
And so let's say you have 5 needs in your assessment. You come in this afternoon. What's the waiting list at the moment?
We do not, in my region, we do not have a waiting list at this moment in Southwestern Connecticut. I can't speak, I don't know of any others, but I know Maureen and Allison might be able to speak to any wait lists in their region.
And for home delivered meals, I think this maybe varies across the state, but in your area, how many meals do you provide a day?
I would say somewhere near 800 meals a day.
No, I'm sorry, how many per person? Is it 1 meal or 2 meals?
Oh, it depends on what the clients need. It's very client focused. So some clients, for some people, their daughter's coming home after work and they'd love to have a family meal together. And so they're really just looking for that lunchtime meal. In other cases, there are no familial or informal supports, and the person is really counting on the nutrition program for food. So we do our best to provide 2 meals a day, and that's the maximum.
And is that and so Marie, you've been going on for a while, and that's super helpful. But I'm just curious if that's the same that folks operate in other regions. Is it really tailored to the client's need, or are there funding constraints that limit the delivery of meals to 1 a day?
I'd say in most areas, at least for Eastern, and I think, I don't want to talk across the state, but that is a very similar situation across the state.
It's similar if you have the funding, because in the senior resource area of Middlesex County, as you all know that I had shared, we had to put a mitigation plan because we were over serving. So we were serving 2 meals a day, 7 days a week. We had to cut back to 1 meal a day, 5 days a week. So we do have to put a mitigation plan in place when there's not funding available and we see the trend is trending high.
Yeah, and I wanted to piggyback. We're in the Western region. It is that custom tailored based on the client, but Marie really articulated the inherent problem of reimbursement based on this program, in that you're always in a state of trying to play catch up. So the only option you have, we went from 7 down to 5 days a week, and then 5 down to 4 in order, but you're behind, you're already behind. We talked about 90 days. You can't implement a timely mitigation plan in the time that you need to balance things out. You implement it in the time that you can. You also have to provide notification. So that's what providers do to be able to try to get at that end of year target. But it's very, very difficult when you're starting from 90 days behind.
And I just want to chime in here with what Marie said, and I want to get back to really the program design, because I think this is basically this is the crux of it. We really need to look at what the process is. So I'm waiting. I'd love to hear the presentation from Erin when she's ready to give us from start to finish, so we can know the entire process. And then we should look at the systems that are in place and what antiquated systems we're using that's taking us all this time to be able to process these invoices and have these approvals for these monies. Because I am at the end of the fiscal year and I am out $1.7 million, which means CRT has floated this program from the beginning of the year. And in the South Central, we had put in a mitigation plan and we had a wait list, and then we were able to release the wait list and open it up because money became available. So I think we really need to look at what the structure of this program looks like, the administrative structure. And also, as I shared before, I asked Erin, what are the administrative processes and oversights that are in place to be able to help the AAAs move forward if they get into any kind of any type of stopgaps that they may have, or any kind of issues that they may have with processing these payments, because that's extremely important for us.
Excuse me, I don't know how to put the little hand thing up. I have a, in relation to that, I have a question on, first of all, what's AAA?
Oh, AAA is an area agency on aging.
Okay, thank you. So when you're talking about the suppliers that you're getting your foodstuffs from, I worked in credit and collections, and all of the groups that were, all of our customers that were government related, we had to extend longer terms to. Is there any way that from your suppliers that you can get more than a net 30? I mean, we had some really weird terms that we had to, you know, they weren't just net 90, they were strange things like 45 days after, you know, the second or the first of the month or whatever. Is there any way of extending terms?
Well, I think that's what we're having a conversation about, but we're hearing from the people who are serving the providers that are serving the meals that it's difficult for them. I mean, Lena just talked about over $1 million that, you know, she says the AAAs owe her, you know, and it's puts a big burden on them if prices are going up and they're being asked to, you know, put into place mitigation plans, which means they're serving people less food.
I will tell you that it's similar to the LAHEAP, when the oil vendors, they want their payments within 2 weeks because it's hard for them. They have to purchase the oil, they have to do deliveries, they have expenditures. So the CAP agencies have to pay them within a 2-week period of time that came, because the oil vendors came and they were screaming because they were out of pocket. So it's a triple effect. If we get, you know, a longer time to pay our vendors, everybody loses.
So can I'm really interested in understanding, you know, we had a really good overview about how the program works from Marie and her area. But then hearing from other folks, you know, very quickly, we heard that there are some places where meals arrive, home delivery meals come 7 days a week, 5 days a week, 4 days a week. There are places where people get 2 meals, places where people get 1 meal. There are places where there are wait lists, and there are places where there are not wait lists. And I'm curious from, you know, either the agencies, the AAA's perspective, or actually, you know, Erin, I know we're putting you on the spot a lot today. Just sort of comment about why we see that, you know, huge variation. And I could understand, you know, you've got a wealthy community like Westport, you got a poor community like Bridgeport. I could see if it's just purely on the basis of town need, but otherwise it's hard for me to understand why you've got such a huge variation depending on what region you're in.
Okay, so according to the Older Americans Act and by our state statute, the baseline for meals is 1 meal 5 days a week. So obviously, as Marie said, there are going to be people that don't want a meal every day of the week. So that brings it down a little bit. There will be people that are at very high need where it's been chosen to put 2 meals into place. That is not a requirement of the SUA, and I can't say that I believe that it's a requirement of the Area Agency on Aging to serve over and above that. This is a program with a finite amount of funding from the feds, taking the state dollars out of it. ACL will tell you this program was not intended to serve all who might otherwise qualify because there is simply not the funding for it. So that's when we started to get into those prioritization things, which is not an easy thing to do. In terms of different areas, serving different numbers of people, having, funding conflicts, having funding shortages, some of it comes down to budgeting and making sure, again, I understand that, that's easier said than done. It's always a moving target. But there's not some extra pot of money that we're holding back. So it's a very tricky situation. Now, again, it comes down to how different programs target different populations. And it's very difficult when you're in a region that has 50 towns to sort of parse out the equitability piece. That's definitely very difficult. So the intrastate funding formula that determines how the federal funding goes out to the AAAs, again, there are 5 planning and service areas in Connecticut as required by the Older Americans Act. The intrastate funding formula that the Older Americans Act requires basically looks at how many older adults, individuals over 60, are in this particular region, how many of them have, are at the federal poverty level, how many of them are in a rural area, how many of them have a disability or high levels of assistance with activities of daily living. And then it weights all of that. And that's how the funding basically is allocated. So really, we are trying to be as equitable as possible when we do that allocation. But it's very tricky to get it exactly perfect.
So Aaron, you talked about budgeting differences being one of the sources of, is there some sort of common budgeting metric? I mean, it seems like we're doing all, look, I understand that there are more rural parts of the state, there are urban areas, the size of the areas varies a little bit, but generally people are doing the same thing, whether you're in one part or another part of the state. It seems like this is right. We're not talking about a huge difference in the home delivered meal is a home delivered meal, even if the driveway is longer. So I'm just wondering, how are we doing? Do we have standard budgeting practices? Are folks using core CT? Like, how are we? What can we do to sort of streamline the administration of this program, or is there reason not to do that? Across regions.
I'm going to defer to one of our AAAs on that because that's we don't oversee the actual elderly nutrition providers in terms of how they are doing what they're doing beyond sort of a compliance piece that comes down to what the AAA has designated. We start at the 1 meal per day, 5 days per week, and that's our baseline. So if Marie or Allison or Maureen can comment more specifically on the regional piece of it.
Sure, I'll take a stab at it. The budget package is exactly the same across the state for any elderly nutrition provider. However, these programs are based on an economy of scale. And I don't want to get too far into the weeds. Math is my thing and probably not the thing for a lot of other people on the task force. But the larger the elderly nutrition provider, the more they can take those fixed expenses and spread them among the unit cost for the meal. So there is not an established unit cost for a home delivered meal and a cafe meal that is the same in all of our elderly nutrition programs. Each program builds a budget submission, a budget package based on their individual expenses. Some may have higher indirect costs. Others may be able to negotiate because they're a larger program, may be able to negotiate a pound of chicken 10 cents less than a smaller program might be able to do it. And that is going to put a difference into the unit cost submitted. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of competition, or perhaps fortunately, depending on your perspective, for these ENP contracts. So therefore, we as AAAs have to do our very best to work with the ENPs to make sure that they're getting a unit cost that meets their needs, because otherwise what we see is quality suffer in the meal. And when quality suffers, people either at the cafes do not want or do not accept the meals or complain about the meals, or the portions go down to a point where it's no longer satisfying to the individual who's looking to have the meal. So that economy of scale is absolutely critical to the presentation of the budget. The other piece is that most of our EMPs, all of the ones at this table, are serving both the Medicaid waiver, the Connecticut Home Care Program, and the Title III program. They are making the same meal in the same cafeteria with the same staff, putting it on the same truck with the same delivery person. In many cases, delivering to the same senior housing complex. One person is on the Connecticut Home Care Program, which says, of course, you can get 2 meals a day. Sure, you can have 2 meals a day, but Medicaid reimbursement, and I know Representative Gilchrist is doing her best to work on this, but Medicaid reimbursement is paltry as compared to other forms of reimbursement. So therefore, that same meal prepared in the same way, taken to the same place, is limited by Medicaid reimbursement. That causes the ENPs in their budgeting to shift some of those expenses over to the Title III side. I don't know what the answer is to that economic or equation, but it is a real pressure on Title III costs.
Marie, one question on that. We did put some money in the budget to try to increase the reimbursement rate for those home delivery for the Medicaid home care meals. Have you seen that the reimbursement increase? Has that happened yet?
The 4.8.
What's that?
Is it the 4%, the 4.86% that went into effect?
I'm not sure, but I know that we put in some money into the state budget that began July 1st, and I just don't know if that's actually filtered down yet.
We have seen that increase. However, I will tell you that since 2013, the Medicaid program has not seen regular cost of living or any type increases. So to use Lena's words, we're playing catch up all the time, and the actual cost of the food and even with the additional funding is in many cases not funding the 100% of the meal. So you see that cost shifting take place.
Okay, so when you say that you're sort of moving money back and forth, it sounds like folks who would be eligible for the home care meals are being encouraged instead to go on the home care meals that are being encouraged to go instead on elderly nutrition, or
no, not at all. Not at all. What I'm saying is when Lena or Stan or Joel are doing their budgets and trying to figure out how to make this nutrition program work for their nonprofit organizations, they know how much money they're going to get in for the 10,000 home care Medicaid meals that they're serving. And they know what the total cost is to provide all of those meals, because it's the same meals, home care meals and Title III, same meals, same kitchen, same staff. So when they look at their budgeting, if they know that they are 10% short on Medicaid meals, based on the reimbursement being 10% less than what it costs, they're going to take that 10% of cost, and that has to move over. It has to get paid somewhere. They can't take a 10% loss on it. So those expenses, more of those fixed expenses are allocated towards the Title III meals because the funding is not available on Medicaid. So again, when we're looking at solutions, one potential solution is finding equitable reimbursement on the Medicaid side so that cost pressure isn't transferred over to the Title III side. It's not about the clients. The clients who qualify for Connecticut Home Care Program are going to get their meals paid out of Connecticut Home Care Program. They must. It is against state rules to use Title III funds to supplement a client who's on the Connecticut Home Care Program, because Medicaid is the payer of last resort. That's just a rule.
So one of the reason we focused on trying to increase Medicaid funding this year was because we thought we could get a federal match. And so that, well, we did get a federal match. And we thought that that was a way to support, you know, elderly nutrition overall, but also try to channel that into a place where we could, you know, increase our our bang to the buck, and hoping that that would help float the entire program. So I obviously we didn't put enough money in, but that was our thinking.
But it helps.
Yeah.
It did help, Senator, and I'm sure we're all most grateful for it.
Okay, so just, you know, it's interesting to also hear about the importance of having scale and that being a particular burden. How many nutrition providers are there in the state?
11.
11? So 11 across 5 AAAs? And how was that determined? And are they approximately all the same size, or are there differences?
No, they cover vastly different regions. 2 are actually congregate only programs that only serve congregate meals, and the rest provide both home delivered and congregate meals, but they're in very different subregions and have very different sizes.
Okay. And are there ways that we can, I mean, I'm just sort of thinking right now, and so the purchasing issues, does everyone agree that there are, you know, different purchasing issues depending on the size of the provider? I could also see that, you know, if you're, you know, some sort of mom and pop provider, you may be able to come in and get a local deal or something along those lines, and maybe nimble is better, but maybe that's not how, you know. Marie, you're a numbers person, and I may not be. So, is bulk purchasing really a real driver of this inequity, or are there other differences as well that we're not missing, or that we're missing?
Bulk purchasing is huge. It's basically leveraging resources. I mean, you buy in bulk, you get lower prices, of course. Yeah. I mean, the other thing is, I mean, we've looked at this in different, even as it has to do with providing case management services and CAP agencies in terms of rural versus urban, right? So there's bulk in terms of economies of scales of food, but then there's other costs that pertains to transportation and basic delivering meals across suburban towns. So that's why everybody's budget is different. Maybe, you know, my food costs are higher, but maybe TVCCA has more, you know, transportation costs that they'd have to pay to be able to deliver food to individuals. So that's why it's across the board.
Why, I guess, playing, you know, I'm not pretending that anybody's going to like this idea, but if, you know, we can't do a whole lot about the transportation costs because, you know, it's harder to get out to places in rural Northwest Connecticut than it is in, you know, my part of the state. But why wouldn't we want to have, you know, one nutrition provider for the state of Connecticut? If you get the highest bang for your buck, if you could purchase in that, what's the reason for breaking it into 11? Oh,
I
come
mean,
on. Nobody likes the idea. So why not? What's the reason?
It's a competitive bid process. So first of all, I don't know that any provider would want to take on the entire state. It is a very complex program. And we do have some providers that cater their own meals in-house and some that subcontract out to caterers. I mean, I'll let the ENP speak to like if they would want to do the entire state, but the Older Americans Act really wants providers that are based in the community where they are serving. So that's part of it as well.
Mm-hmm. Plus, there's a benefit to organizations like CAP agencies and others to provide wraparound services as well.
I would just add, like, we're very rural in Torrington in the northwest corner. We've been doing the Older Americans Act program since its inception. So we're over 45 years we've been doing it. Without the city of Torrington providing free space, free rent, free heat, the cost for this delivery of these meals would be astronomical. Plus, you have people in the area who understand each region. You know, I wouldn't know how to run a very urban area. It's not in our demographics, so I wouldn't have that expertise. You would need to rent a building up here. You would need to have specific contracts for gasoline and different things. So I just think that there's so many pitfalls to trying to do every region. At that point, it wouldn't be about being able to get the same to being able to get a cheaper price by economy of scale, because everything would still be compounded regionally by having to have all the same pitfalls for all of us, rent and labor and all those things. And we do not, we're not a commissary. We contract with Trio Food Service, who has many of the contracts, and we benefit from their economy of scale by their numbers, not just ours, because we have smaller numbers in our region than most other regions due to our rural nature.
And is there a way for us to, okay, you guys have convinced me that we shouldn't have one for the state, but is there a way that we could help multiple providers, bulk purchase together, or is there, what could we do to sort of streamline things to help your dollars go further?
We've looked into things in the past, like paper products and different things with coordination with the state unit. Several years ago, again, regionally, we do things a little bit different, but Oliver Packaging, that's our Meals on Wheels tray. We all seem to use that. So we get a little better price by having, the region supporting different types of products. But regionally, I don't make the same food as say someone would be in New Britain or Bridgeport or Hartford. We have a certain menu system up here that gets approved by the state that wouldn't necessarily be as popular in other parts of the state, so that there's still diversity within the menus, even though we all share menus. We have menu meetings with Trio, which is multi-regional. We all meet together and we agree on the menus, and they're very similar, but there's a lot of tweaking that goes on just because some things are popular in certain areas that just people won't eat or love on the same token.
Actually, I think that's one of the most important regional differences actually is the ability to meet not just the nutritional needs of older adults, but their cultural preferences as well. The ability to address different tastes, different preferences. I know that's one of the things that Lena's organization does really well in terms of identifying niche kitchens, because the better you identify the needs and preferences of your population, the less food waste there'll be, the better nutrition there will be, the better the opportunity for those congregate meals to pull in the population that you are targeting. You've heard us talk a little bit about, how difficult it is to address that equity issue. And one of the ways to do that is to specifically tailor meals to what people will like. Because another component to the Older Americans Act meals, which I don't think has come up yet, is we can't say no. It is illegal for us to deny someone a meal. And the reason that this is important is when we look at, one of our charges coming up is the future, right, of the elderly nutrition program. The demographics don't lie. Right? We know where the population is going. The Older Americans Act tells us we can't say no, and we have nowhere to go. We know that ARPA is running out. We know that, even a continuing resolution at this point is likely to come in at less than pre-pandemic levels. So that's why the emphasis right now on identifying the issues with the current structure is really important, because if our vision down the line is to provide a meal to everyone that needs it, the Older Americans Act is not going to be that vehicle, because we can't say no, but we're going to run out of funds. It's economics, it's demographics. So, I appreciate the regional opportunity, the regional differences, because that's how we get to the people that need us the most and are most likely to bring in the populations that, again, we're trying to target, but can't be exclusionary. Okay, it's a very thin needle to thread.
But essentially, we've already said, at least not now, with our waiting list, right? So it's moving in that direction.
I was gonna say that, I mean, you know, fuel may be an area that, you know, that we could look at, you know, that would be common to all regions to maybe get some kind of, you know, reduced costs. I know municipalities have, you know, have programs for their fleets where they get a discount rate. We haven't been successful here with our municipality in being able to jump on that program, but you know, maybe that's something where all of us coming together to get because fuel would be common to all of us. You know, the number of miles we travel, maybe not, but fuel's needed to get these fleets going. So that might be some kind of bulk universal cost that, you know, could be fixed.
Yep. Erin, can I just ask Erin a question on the formula? The data that you talked about, the 125% of poverty, you said, I think 60 and over and total population, is that data updated annually? And if yes or no, where does it come from?
It's updated with each state plan, which goes between 3 and 4 years, and is census data.
It's
Either
census data. So it's
Yeah, either the decennial census or the 5-year estimates.
Okay.
So I mean, in terms of, thank you, Maureen, for, you know, outlining the long-term challenges, right? Food is getting more expensive and you know, the population is aging and our federal funding is not increasing and maybe decreasing. So what, you know, we can either supplant with additional state money, and then the question is, where do we put it? And how much do we need? And it would be helpful along that vein to look at what, you know, potentially what other states are doing. But, you know, there's a question of additional state funding. And then the question is, what else can we do to, you know, bring down costs and support providers? And so the idea that I've heard today on that front is assistance with, you know, fuel costs. We could also just, you know, reform the contracting process in various respects to ease the burden on providers. I don't know that seems good on a fairness perspective, but what I'm not sure about is how that, you know, will that help us lower the overall cost of the program? Will that save us money as well? But it seems like a good thing to do. Are there other ideas that folks have that could help, you know, save money across the program? And I understand that we are being hamstrung by the Older Americans Act, but you know, we're a small state. We have fewer people in our state than Los Angeles County, and yet we have, you know, 5 different regions, 11 providers, and I don't know how many subcontractors. So what can we do? The other folks have ideas that we should maybe explore. Or questions about how the program works in terms of, you know.
I have a question about, we used to utilize our tech schools. Do we still have tech schools that have the culinary programs? And is there any way in incorporating them with the things like the baked goods, the cookies, the brownies, the breads, the things like that?
Doesn't sound like it, but I mean, I guess that's a good question. Is there a provision for donated food at any point along this, or is that really not allowed?
No.
We have to comport with federal, like FDA food code guidelines.
Yeah.
So everything has to be purchased from a licensed approved provider like a Cisco or, you know, there are others, but donated food gets into a very murky area.
Okay.
Michaelina, I will say that one of the providers in the North Central region is not exactly the way you described with the tech schools. However, it is a program that is based on vocational training. So for example, a lot of the folks that are cafe managers or are working in the kitchens, learning about food preparation, learning about the industry, are folks in workshop based environments, so that type of a program does exist. And, for what it's worth, that is a very effective way to keep some costs down. When we're talking about, different methodology, they're able to utilize a different skill set. They're able to utilize a different labor pool. So that, Senator Lesser, you talked about what are some of the things that can affect a budget. Well, that's the kind of thing that also could affect a budget. And another reason why region-wide is good, because an organization like that may or may not be able to do the entire state, depending on the labor pool at their disposal. So, Michaelina, I just wanted to throw that out there, as it is a slight example of what you were describing. But I did want to go back because Senator Lesser, I think that you were on a really important path there too, looking at what have been identified so far as some opportunities. And I think we definitely identified the flow of payment. I think that that's definitely something that we can all agree on. I think that you mentioned we are a small state, and this is largely a procedural and administrative and managerial type of a thing. So I feel as though with the right people around the table to brainstorm some solutions, I feel like that is something that we could probably move the needle on optimistically. And then you also asked a question about how to look at the flow or how to reduce cost. And I think, one of the things that from an area agency on aging perspective, and I don't want to speak for my other sister agencies, but one of the pieces that we are looking at streamlining is in the data entry, collection, reporting, and management, because you heard Marie discuss the fact that we can't bill for meals until they have been provided, vetted, authorized, confirmed. I mean, there's a whole subset of stuff that has to happen for each of those consumers. And to streamline the manner in which that data is collected, entered, cleaned, scrubbed, and uploaded could be a source of significant savings and speed, quite honestly, because it should reduce the amount of transit time between the area agencies on aging and the ENPs. So that could be a really welcome idea. And again, something that is workable, something that is in process. As AAAs, we are looking into opportunities to address this right now. It is not something that we are ready to launch necessarily, but a lot of the groundwork has already been laid. And we are currently looking at potential funding sources that we may apply for collectively as a group. So again, saving the state, saving the program, and again, toward that spirit of streamlining, speed is everything. And if it gets the data in fast, gets into the state unit on aging faster, it gets the payments back to the EMPs faster. So we would like to talk perhaps a little bit more about that, but it's really in the weeds. You want to talk about in the weeds. This is like really in there, but I didn't want to lose the thread that you were on in terms of identifying solutions, because I think that's really where we need to be before we can identify or envision where we want to go with this program.
Yeah. So
Thank you.
I
Go ahead, Lita.
I just totally agree with Maureen, and I'd be willing to work with her and others to really take a deep dive into this, and maybe Marie would want to. I mean, because there is huge, I think there's efficiencies to be had here, and I think it really behooves us to really take a deep dive in this.
If I could just add that as AAAs, we are going to apply for the OPM nonprofit grant. And the purpose of that application is to build the technology around the Older Americans Act funding and specifically nutrition. Right now, someone in Lena's agency, excuse me, is creating these intake forms for every client. It equates to reams of paper that have to get delivered to all of the AAAs, and then monthly census of how many meals each of those people receive. In some cases, we're getting them from nutrition sites where, you know, a much older worker is keeping a scratch pad with, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4 scratch to tell us how many meals these individuals have. We are then trying to translate that data, make sure that the last name is correct, that the birth date matches the birth date we have in the federal system, et cetera. The new program that we are requesting support from OPM for would allow Lena's office to directly enter into a portal, a HIPAA compliant portal, the information needed for the client. That information would go into a database, and then at the end of the month, when she says how many meals Mrs. Jones had, it would automatically be entered, confirmed, and quickly moved over to the State Unit on Aging, which has to also approve that data and then provide us with payment. So there is a great, I think this is a great area of work where we don't want, I know Maureen is being coy because we don't know that we're going to get that funding. I'll tell you, we're working very hard on the application because we've been working with CanASP and you know, through the leadership of Joel Sikorsky and others around the table. I think we hear you, and it's a matter of figuring out what are those systems that we can change and how to make this program work better. So Lena, yeah, I think it'd be great to have additional discovery once we know we're going to secure that funding. How can we build something that works for the providers as well as works for the AAA's execution of the request to the State Unit on Aging? And we need the State Unit on Aging around the table. Everyone has been challenged with staffing, and I understand that. Those challenges include delays in payment, and we can't hide those.
I just wanted to jump in, and I think that I don't really want to wait until we go and get funding to start looking at this. I think that there's some probably short-term wins that we can gain if we start looking at the entire process, and then there's some long-term things, goals that we will have with additional funding and possibly new technology. But I think that we should take an initial step in really looking and ironing out the entire process and seeing where we can create some efficiencies in the short term. Yeah.
And to that vein, how do you think we should? I agree with you, Lena. I don't think we want to just say, "Hey, this is up to OPM to decide," and you know that's going to be the goal of this task force. Are there specific areas where you think? I mean, first of all, does that sound sufficient? The paperwork issues that Maureen just discussed, or are there other areas where it would be helpful, where we could potentially streamline paperwork, or report? Are there other reporting elements that are not captured in what you discussed?
Right. So I think that we should start from the beginning, right? So Erin graciously agreed to give us a presentation of the overview. So we should look at that because I think that the expediency of funding coming from the feds, and I don't know if we can push that or not. How does that come? Why is it so delayed? Can we do anything about that? Can we speak to our federal delegation about that? Let's look at the whole process, and then we'll take, depending on what that looks like, we'll have to take it apart and figure out where we can have some immediate fixes. So it's the entire flow, the entire workflow until the money comes actually to the providers. And then on the provider piece, that's a whole other thing about efficiencies of economies of scale, of food, of fuel, and even deliveries maybe. So that's another issue. But just right now, in terms of the process, because we cannot continue to wait all this time to get paid. And there's so many processes here and there, and I want to call a spade, the bureaucratic process that it takes to actually get paid, that red tape that we're always talking about. Let's see if we can cut some of the red tape and see if we can get, from 1 to 10 in 4 steps instead of 10 steps. So we have to look at the whole thing. And I think it's prudent for all of us to know what that process looks like, because I totally don't know what the entire process looks like. So it would be helpful. Right, Bill? We've been talking about this for a while. I'm putting you out there.
Okay, so I want to be mindful of time. It's 11:16 and we've got until 11:30. We have on the to-do list today was discussing the program design, additional funding streams, and the future of the elderly nutrition program, and we've sort of dabbled in all three of those. We haven't really talked at length about additional funding streams. We have talked about the except to mention that the home care program is tied to this and the prospect of some additional state funding, although I'm not sure this year what that is given overall pressures on the state budget. I know that we are very close to the state spending cap. Anything else that folks have thought? I know that in some cases, Marie, you mentioned local funding as a potential. Are there other places that we could be looking to supplement the program in either the whole state or in parts of the state?
These meals are based on donations. We do not charge for the meals. No individual elder can be charged for the meals. We always ask for donations, and perhaps we can do a better job of asking for those donations and making elders understand why it is so important to give donations, making family members who benefit from the Meals on Wheels that their mom or dad receive, understanding why that donation is so key and important. So I do throw that out there as a potential, because that's program income that would absolutely help provide more meals, make more meals available.
How many folks are served by the home care program?
15,000 statewide. I don't know how many of them actually receive meals. That would be a DSS question.
Alec, do you answer that?
Don't have that number at the moment.
I think also to add, I know some of the nutrition providers work to incorporate volunteers in their programs and services. That also helps to decrease some of the overall labor costs. But I didn't want to, I think Marie was going to say something on it, and I didn't want to lose sight of it. The fact that, the nutrition providers that have made budgets that they're working within and providing excellent meals and doing wonderful work. The important part is for us to actually abide by those contracts and pay them for what's in the contract already. And so that funding flow is definitely the challenge that we definitely have the opportunity to improve right here within the state, because that's where the flow happens. And if I forget who made the suggestion before, I believe Joel maybe, of looking at, can the state help to cover that federal gap, which we know is coming and is never a fun time. So, getting on track with what we know is part of our contracts right now to pay them on time or in a more timely fashion, and to help cover that federal gap if we can.
I have a question for both the providers and the AAAs. I assume the majority of the funding goes towards direct services, and then there's also a certain amount, in any program that is reserved for overhead and program administration. Is that consistent across the state, or are there differences?
For the AAA's point of view, we receive administration at a little bit over 9%, 9.3% to administer the program, and that is consistent statewide. That is what the Older Americans Act and the State Unit on Aging determine. For the elderly nutrition providers, I know it does depend on the individual budget that they present, and some have potentially a higher rate of general administration or indirect costs than others. The de minimis is a federal requirement that cannot go over 10% of the total cost of the project. However, there are other indirect expenses that change Again, looking at that economy of scale, a smaller program may have a higher percentage of executive salaries allocated to this program than perhaps a multifaceted anti-poverty agency where expenses can be spread over a broader number of programs.
Great. So I want to give the next couple minutes just to see if there's anything, I've been monopolizing the conversation as chair, and it's my right, I guess, but anything else that folks want to raise before we go to the date and time of the next meeting?
Are there any insurance issues involved with what you're doing that you might find some common ground on?
You mean like commercial liability insurance? They got to rent trucks and or have trucks and have insurance on the truck?
Just any kind of insurance. I'm just trying to think of categories.
It's a good question. I don't know the answer to that, but folks, anybody want to raise their hand? No.
So, no, I don't know about that. Just a question about next steps. I was wondering, as you know, I'm really kind of eager to take a deep dive into the program design here, just in terms of the operations of it. So I wanted to know if we can, what are the next steps in terms of maybe Erin doing a presentation from her end in terms of how it works there? And then do we also have the AAAs to kind of talk about what their processes are in terms of when they get their funding and what they have to do and what they have to do for invoicing, just to get into the weeds of this, because I really do think it's important.
Allison Marie, do you think you guys could present a presentation of your own as well? Is that something that I'm putting you on the spot?
Certainly.
No problem.
Terrific. So we're going to have some presentations then at the next meeting. The date that we were considering for that, stand by, I'm just pulling up my notes, October 25th from 10 to 11:30. Hopefully that works for everyone. And we will have those at the top of the agenda, but we'll also have some opportunity for further conversation on some of these. And some of the ideas that I took notes on today were the possibility of states fronting the money, increasing home care program funding, potential fuel cost assistance, and of course we need to do a deep dive into data entry reporting and the streamlining of that, and looking at the proposal that the AAAs have in applying for the OPM grant. And if there are other things that I missed, I'm sure they will be in the minutes, and we'll also compare notes between now and the 25th. Anything else for the good of the order before we adjourn today?
Yeah,
I just had one. Oh,
go ahead.
I just had one point. I'm Eugene Theroux with TVCCA. The timing of the funding is one thing. Budget and funds are another. When we negotiate our budgets, more looking at more money for a home care program, but also more money for the AAAs. We negotiated our budgets at funding prior to COVID. And as we all know, and we've all talked about, costs and pricing and everything is going up. So, I think we need to also keep that in mind when we're looking at the challenges that we're facing with our elder nutrition programs and the numbers that are increasing, but also, we have to look at, even though it is partially funded, but what that unit rate's going to be in the future, and what the viability of our programs are based on the amount of money that we're going to be needing to operate our programs.
Yeah.
So does everyone have new contracts beginning in October? Is that when that's a new federal fiscal year? So is that when?
Yeah.
So, Representative Gilchrist and I put out a request, and so it'd be really interesting to see, how things are changing, effective October, hopefully those contracts will reflect new, the cost today of providing those meals, and that'll, I think, be helpful for us to understand exactly where the shortfall is.
But one thing we just went through was an RFP, and basically that's stating what we need as programs to operate. And that was kind of in a way a wish list, but that's what we need today to operate. One, we had to negotiate that rate down because the AAAs didn't have enough money to be able to fund that. But we're also looking at that cost as being today, not 3 years down the road when the next RFP comes around. So those are challenges that we are faced with.
Yeah, I just want to dive in a minute for clarification, because before we talked about providers getting their contracts and serving the meals that they can serve based on what the amount of the contract. The fact of the matter is, because of the ARPA monies, for example, we are in North Central $1.4 million less than we had last year, but we're serving at the same level. So we've got to look at how we make up that gap to continue to serve the people that are right now on the program. And so we've done some kind of, we've moved some money. We've got like $563,000 that was supposed to be used for equipment replacements in the kitchen that we got through ARPA, and we're using that for meals. We've got sort of a surplus that we have from last year here in North Central. So we're rolling that over, and Maureen has already shared with us that she's going to allow us to roll that over for this year to take care of some of the gap, but we've still got a shortage of about $400,000. So that's what we're talking, and we can't just automatically just take people off the program. So those are the issues that we have to deal with. So now I have to look at when and if we have to put a mitigation plan in place. When does that happen? Or are there additional fundings that can come from other sources? And I'm always praying that Maureen comes up with a miracle, but I don't know if she's got a wand this year, but we'll see. So, and that was part of the cliff of ARPA. So the monies that we were using for equipment and all of that has to be put right back into meals. I do not want to put a mitigation plan in place, so we'll have to see how much money how much we can get of the $400,000 not to do that. And that's what putting everything in there. So I don't know what TBCCA had to do, what Bill had to do, but I'm sure it's something similar.
Yeah, we basically had to do the same thing. The part of the challenge is that's the Band-Aid for this year. Next year, we're going to be faced with the same thing, and then probably even a greater deficit. So yes, to that point.
Yeah, so that gets to what the future of the program is going to look like.
Well, on that cheery note, we will. I will take a motion to adjourn for today, and we will catch up in October and certainly have conversations in the interim. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Erin has a question.
No,
Yeah.
no motion.
Oh,
A motion by Erin to adjourn. Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
By Joel. All in favor?
aye.
Okay.
Aye.
Opposed?